Authors Press.
Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. And on the line with us today, we have Johann Zwan. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, World War II + 6, A Kid's Memories of War and Postwar. And I will say, Johan was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business, Authors Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, move it to Authors Press. You can find them at authorspress.com. I'm so excited to have Johan here on the line because his book we're discussing today, listen, we all know about war, and specifically World War II, right? I mean, we here in the States, we grew up being taught it every year almost in our history classes. But what I love so much about Johann's book is how often are we really educated on exactly what war does to the innocent bystanders which are left on the sidelines. We know what the soldiers go through, right? We were taught about D-Day. We were taught about the soldiers rushing the beach and how many lives were lost. And I'm so excited that we have Johan here on the line because he's going to be discussing this book from his personal experience. This is all around his life and his experience that he had dealt with. And it's such a wonderful education that we're getting ready to receive. So without further ado, let's bring him here on the line with us. Johan, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Wonderful. Well, listen, we're very much looking forward to this. I know we have a lot to discuss. Now, before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly. Tell our listening audience a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I am a first-generation immigrant. After my medical school training back in Amsterdam, in Holland, I came to the States in 1963 for what was supposed to be 1 year of a fellowship. And it has now grown out to 60 years or so.
Wow.
I started during medical school doing some research and afterwards continued so that I could get a PhD degree. When I came to the States, I continued the research on the development of the eye, and later on I switched a bit more to the clinical side and practiced ophthalmology, eye surgery, specializing in what kids need. I've enjoyed my living in the United States tremendously. Obviously, that's why I didn't go back. And there is more opportunity here, I think, for people to do what they would like to do. So my career in ophthalmology was quite varied. I started out at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. From there I went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, teaching anatomy and embryology. And then I was asked to come to Boston, to Harvard, where I again taught anatomy and embryology for a couple of years. And then I made a switch. I missed the work with patients. And I decided I wanted to be trained as an ophthalmologist, eye surgeon, which I did in Albany, New York. Harvard was very kind, chairperson, I should say, of the anatomy department, allowed me to go 3 years on leave to do my training, and then I came back, but this time in the ophthalmology department. I spent another 10, 12 years, something like that. And then in 1988, I was offered a very good position at the University of Texas in San Antonio. So I moved to San Antonio. There I was on the faculty for 6 years, and then I was invited to come to Saudi Arabia. And I spent 3 years in the clinic here in Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, was a very positive experience. And then came back, and by that time I was 65, and I knew that it would be difficult to find a faculty position again. So I joined a private practice, and as a sideline, I was still teaching as a clinical professor. I retired in 2017 because I was getting old, number one. Number two, I didn't quite trust the flexibility of my hands anymore. And when you operate on small eyes of kids, that's something that you should not have. And I decided to hang it up.
Fantastic. You know, what a wonderfully impressive resume that you have there, Johan. We're going to have to invite you back here on the network just so we can talk about your illustrious career, because it is absolutely impressive. But since today's interview is going to be focused on the book that you've written, let's jump right in. World War II +6, A Kid's Memories of War and Post-War. Tell us a little bit about your book.
I started writing it for one reason, and that my kids and grandchildren often would ask me for what happened to me in that period of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And second reason was that what the current generation knows about the events during the Second World War is pretty limited. And I thought it would be interesting to give the memory from the 5 years that I lived under German Nazi occupation in the Netherlands, Holland. And I really had a lot of fun writing it. It took me a bit less than a year. I had to do some research for it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the chapters are not things that I was involved in, but most of it is based purely on my memories. Fortunately, for things that are a long time ago, memories are usually better for old people than the most recent events. So,
absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Johan. Next question I'd love to get into, let's discuss inspiration. Now, of course, inspiration can take many forms. Now, you already stated, listen, this really was something that started with family around you that wanted to know what your life and what your experience was like growing up during this time. Now, why didn't it stay there? I mean, what inspired you to put this out for the mass public to be able to partake in as well?
Many people in this country are not aware what an enormous influence the Second World War had on the development of the United States. The role of women, for instance, expanded enormously. The men were called up and sent to war, and a great many of positions that had been occupied by men suddenly had to require the woman power to take over. You know, industry, building huge ships, building airplanes, and after the war was over, I think that tendency for women to work outside the house became stronger and stronger. One other reason why I wrote this book is that people have no concept what it is for families, children, parents to live through a war like this and undergo some really bad experiences, which you have to survive. You have to depend on each other in order to do that. And third reason was that I had great admiration for my parents. My father was a family physician in my hometown, a very good physician, but shortly after the war had started and the Germans were taking over the country, people joined the underground resistance. He, as a medical person, did not want anything to do with guns or hand grenades or anything else like that. And his activities mostly involved rescue of people that otherwise might have been killed by the Germans. The history of the Jews during the Second World War and before that in Germany is really quite atrocious. And millions of them came back in the gas chambers. My Dad helped them to find places where they could disappear underground, so to speak, on farms, in family homes, and so on, to be invisible and escape this horrible situation.
Wow.
After Allies had landed in Normandy and more air activity started to take place, planes got shot down, and American pilots and other flyers, and English as well, would be captured by the Germans and stuck in concentration camps or pretty awful conditions. He was one of the people that helped them to escape. Okay, put him underground, and there was a route really manned by various groups of people throughout Holland and then Belgium and France that helped these pilots to get back to the Allied lines or via Spain, so that they could rejoin our fighting soldiers and air personnel, Air Force personnel.
Mm-hmm.
So he was actually awarded with a thank you letter from President Eisenhower, which was done in the name of President Truman.
Fantastic.
My mother, and I always looked up at him as a hero. My mother, I've come to realize, was at least as much of a hero as my dad was. You know, in 1943, my dad got arrested for some of his activity by the Germans, was shipped to Rotterdam to stand trial at a German headquarters, Ortskommandantur, was put on a train and shipped to a concentration camp.
Oh my goodness.
He was there for several months, and then he was discharged and fortunately came home. But in the meantime, my mother was the one who kept everything together. You know, we were at that point 4 boys, and my mom was present of a 5th baby, which turned out to be a girl. And to keep everything together, to see your husband stuck in a train on his way to the concentration camp without any knowledge if whether you could back or when, and still keep your kids feeling safe during bombing attacks and that sort of thing, to me is just as courageous as what my dad did.
Absolutely.
So I'm grateful to both of them.
As you should be. You know, guys, again, here on the line with Johann Zwan, we're discussing his book World War II +6, A Kid's Memories of War and Postwar. You know, Johan, this is absolutely all incredible. Thank you so much for the information that you've expressed thus far. You know, as we start to tie up this wonderful interview, next question that I'd love to get into, what would you say was a highlight for you? Or if not a highlight, maybe something that surprised you that you weren't expecting prior to embarking upon this journey?
Well, I wouldn't call it a highlight, but 2 events that really stuck in my mind were the evacuations in 1940, when the Germans had attacked Holland. The mayor of our city decided that he must order evacuation of the entire city because he calculated that the French with the German army could approach our city and go right through it. So for safety's sake, he ordered the evacuation. And in about 2 hours, our entire city was emptied out, except for some people with chronic problems that could really not move. And I vividly remember being in my dad's car with my brothers and mother, driving very slowly out of Horten because the streets were clogged with people. You know, and trying to get away and somehow get some of their stuff with them. So there were bicycles that were not riding the bicycles, but were packed with suitcases and blankets and all sorts of other things. I remember one lady particularly, an elderly lady who sat on an ice cream vendor's cart that was basically a three-wheeler bicycle, and with three openings on the top where normally the ice cream containers would stand. She was sitting on top of it with one leg in each of the holes, and her son, I assume, was bicycling her along. There were people that had dogs even, cats, canaries, birds in their cages, and so on and so on. I've never seen anything like that before, and I've never seen anything like it afterwards. We had another investigation, and in 1944, the Germans ordered a large number of homes to be emptied out, homes that were close to the Merwede River. The Merwede is a branch of the Rhine on its way to the North Sea. And in 2 days' time, we had to move, find another place. That's at that time, 5 kids, father, mother, sister of my mother, and the father of my mother. And my dad found a place which was basically a suite of 2 rooms, living room size. And we all got packed in there with 5 kids, 2 parents, grandparents, aunt, and I still don't quite understand how on earth they managed to get all these people in those 2 not very large rooms. So that's where we spent the winter of 1944-45 on until we were liberated in May 5, 1945.
Wow. There you have it. I mean, what more can be said? Again, we've all heard the stories of World War II. We know about just war in general. But there haven't been many stories written about a direct experience from an innocent bystander's point of view. Not somebody directly affiliated with the war, not a soldier fighting in the war, someone living their day-to-day lives, revolving around how that war affects them. Absolutely incredible. You know what you gotta do. Pick up your copy of World War II +6, A Kid's Memories of War and Postwar by Johann Zwan. You surely will not be disappointed. Let's get educated, let's grow, let's develop. Johan, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today at People of Distinction.
Thank you. Thank you very much.